Subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to press the bell icon to get all the latest updates.
Can we take a look at the fiscal deficit, which the government now says does stand at 9.5%, 9.5% of the GDP. The government, of course, explained why there has been a deviation from the target, which is, of course, at 3% for the next financial year. Everybody expected that to actually happen. And, we knew that the government would have to spend more, but there can be, of course, two views on whether the government went far enough. We are now looking at an estimated fiscal deficit of 6.8% of GDP for next year. You are with the Mojo Story. My name is Barkha Dutt. You're watching our special continuing coverage as we decode the union budget. Our guests are with us. We have Dr. Shamika Ravi, who has been, of course, a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council in the past and is one of our best-known commentators. We have Dr. Ashwini Deshpande, who's with the Ashoka University. We have Ameerullah, who's with the CDPP, and we have Dr. Arvind Mayaram, who's of course an advisor to the Rajasthan government. Welcome to all of you, and I'll start with you, Shamika, if I may. Just your first big thoughts on the numbers we've seen so far. Sorry, let me just unmute you. Go ahead. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Hi, good to be here. I think the finance minister had set pretty high expectations. Having said that, we should expect budget of 100 years and so on. I'll not get into where what the expectations were and where she has ended up in terms of delivering. But I do think that, it is an overall reformist budget. I think it is a budget required for an unusual time that we are stuck in. It is pro-growth. I really wish we had this budget 6 years back. Because many of the announcements that were made, for instance, health and infrastructure, a lot of it could also have been done earlier. But I think better late than never. And I'm particularly happy about the big outlays in terms of health, because we've been struggling with very little spending. And of course, it's an unusual year. But I think on the whole, the emphasis on real spending, I think infrastructure is very welcome.
And we look at those numbers one by one, the health and the infra spending, Shamika. But when we look at the fiscal deficit, and there are two views on this. One is that this was expected, and the economic survey called for the government to spend much more, and that's what's happened. The other is that the government could have actually spent even more, and there are people who are saying this is not going to change the consumption sentiment. Do you believe that the government could have gone further in terms of those fiscal deficit figures?
Well, you see, if we look at the exact spending, so even in terms of health, 137%, that's the highlight. Many people think it's not enough. And actually, I would think that, if we actually had more spending capability across states, then perhaps 137% increase might not be enough. But the fact is that we do have spending limitations in terms of many states still sitting with unspent health budget. Means that, just allocating larger amounts is not going to translate into necessarily bigger spending overnight across the states. So I think, expecting higher spend without really seeing the governance, the capacity across the country, it becomes a futile sort of a exercise. Now, the other is the demand side of the story. Now, many people, right from the beginning of the pandemic, we've heard folks say UBI or give cash to the poor and so on. But, we have seen in many of the developed countries that larger spending by the governments have not translated into increased demand. And that's because in unusual times when people are scared, there is so much uncertainty, precautionary savings go up. So people tend to spend whatever extra money comes into their bank account. So perhaps government spending through infrastructure might be a better way to boost demand than alternatives.
Okay. Ashwini, if I can bring you in now, we have the slides of the fiscal deficit, 9.5%, estimated to be 6.8% for the next fiscal. Your thoughts on, obviously the government had to open its purse strings, it has, what's the one thing that leaps out at you when we're looking at what we heard in the budget today?
No, the government, I think fiscal deficit should not be a concern, and I'm not at all worried about the fiscal deficit because it's a very, very unusual time, as everybody has admitted. The point is that whether the government should have done more. Certainly, I'm of the view that in the past year, when the COVID pandemic was raging, particularly through the lockdown, the kind of cash support that had to be given to the poorest of the poor was not forthcoming. These are not the segments that save. I mean, I was just looking at the drop in employment. Every month, almost of the last year, in December, 26 lakh women dropped out of the labor force. In November, it was 15.5 lakhs. In October, it was 29 lakhs. When people are losing jobs, that's not the time that they save. So I think that direct cash support given to at least the bottom 30 to 40% of the people was the need of the hour, is the need of the hour. I mean, I'm not an expert on macro, so I don't know whether that translates to 9% or X% of the deficit. But basically, they have to spend whatever it takes in order to for people to not be pushed into abject poverty or even below the poverty line or even into a marginalized existence, hovering around sort of very, very precarious. So when you lose jobs and when you lose livelihoods, that's not the time that you save from the meager 500 rupees that the government gives you. So I think first that amount has to be increased, and it has to be given to a much larger number of people.
Yeah. Shamika, can I just get you to add to this actually, because, we are, of course, seeing the slides of the government's outlay for health. We look at the infra spending as well. But in terms of, of a boldness of step, we've had some comments saying very safe budget, very transparent budget, good budget, prudent budget. But nobody is saying that it's an imaginative budget for where we stand in terms of the economy, and that many people are saying that the salaried class, the job losses is something that this budget did not specifically address. Your thoughts on that? Sorry, you're muted. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
If you look at the announcements on the taxes, Barkha, I suspect, the government's, I think, efforts to increase employment or to offset the reduction in employment due to the pandemic. I think the best ways are really not direct because the government is in many ways limited in what it can do directly on unemployment. But I think the tax reforms that we have heard, particularly those catering to the MSME sectors, etc., because these are very large employers. And infrastructure, I mean, we shouldn't forget that infrastructure is the largest employer in the urban, semi-urban and other areas. So I think the impact of this budget and primarily the focus on various activities that fall into infrastructure is likely to be quite direct on unemployment.
Let me bring in Ameerullah and Dr. Arvind Mayaram now. Arvind, I'll start with you. I think there's not much to disagree with in this budget. You could look for add-ons that didn't come. You could look for specific schemes maybe that didn't come. But I think Shamika is making the point that the massive increase in government spending will have its own impact eventually on jobs, on opportunities, and therefore indirectly those lost jobs, millions of lost jobs are being addressed. Arvind Mayaram.
I think, let me first say this, that the budget, as you have said, is not very imaginative, but I'm not worried about that. Actually, budget should not be too imaginative. That can also cause issues. Budget is supposed to be something which provides a kind of a roadmap as how it will go, but not upset what is being happening all this while. So therefore, to that extent, yes, you're right that it isn't very imaginative. It has. No,
I was saying people are saying it's not imaginative, but people have also said it's prudent, it's safe, it's transparent. They've also said all those good things.
This is what I'm saying also, that it is not. I'm happy it is not very radical in that sense, because radical budgets also tend to create other kind of issues.
Sure.
But the basic problem here is, whereas I welcome the announcement with regard to, for instance, outlays in medical and health and outlays in infrastructure and so on, one big issue is in terms of revenues. I think revenue targets are very unrealistic. Look at the disinvestment.
We just lost your sound, sir. We just lost your sound. Are you back?
Yeah, can you?
Yes. Yeah, I think you're having a little bit of an unstable connection. Just try and make your point. No, we've lost your sound. Let us try and fix our audio to you, and we'll get you back. But I got the gist of what you were saying about the revenue projections being unrealistic. And Ameerullah, do you want to kind of jump in there? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Burqa. You know, the standard question to ask is whether you can hear me all right. But I guess you are.
We can, yes. Go ahead.
You know, to me, the first signal is the stock market. If in a year when the focus of a budget has to be the poor, the stock markets do so well, I get very worried. It's just amazing how the stock market started off on a high note and then just doubled and tripled in no time. So that sends us a worry. The second issue is the big glaring issue that I haven't heard anyone talk about. I was worried about it that maybe I'd missed something. And then when I looked at the papers, I found it. You know, the Manrega outlay, that's actually been drastically cut down. In a year like this, when we've had, 160 million people unemployed walking back home and all of that, to cut Manrega at a time when we have heard the ministry saying in October that we couldn't cope with the demand is strange, to say the least.
Okay.
The third point is that, some of us were expecting this budget to be headlined the poor. But the budget seems to be headline land. It seems to be about selling lots of land, selling railway land, selling.
Why do you
because
say that?
suddenly there is this new announcement that the government is going to, there is a word called monetize, which in simple English means sell. Government land is railways and airports, and that's a serious issue. That is how we are going to make ends meet.
You don't think it went far enough to acknowledge the suffering of the poor in a pandemic year, in particular the plight of the migrant workers? I just want to let Amit, you want Arvind, Arvind, you're back with us. I'm going to let you complete your point, and I want Shamika Ravi to actually pick up on some of this. The other thing that we need to spend some time talking about is farmers, the reference that was made by the government defending its record on farmers. But in terms of not being pro-poor enough, some of our earlier speakers on this program were saying that there should have been a wealth tax. And this was the year, if any year was, for a wealth tax. But Arvind, Mayuram, I'll let you complete your point, and Shamika and Ashwini to then come in. Go ahead. Sorry, give me a second to unmute you. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm not very sanguine about the revenue targets. We have seen in the best of years, the revenue, for instance, divestment targets last year were close to 1,30,000 or 40,000 crores. We achieved 33,000 crores. I don't see how we are going to, and in the manner in which divestments have taken place, there has been a play of words. Some observers are saying that privatization has been used. So this is a good sign. To my mind, it's rhetorical, but government finds it very difficult to sell its assets. The same thing will happen with land. So all the revenues, non-tax revenues that have been shown are dodgy. I don't think we will be able to achieve those. As far as tax revenues are also concerned, I don't think the buoyancy is going to be the kind of buoyancy that has been shown in the budget. We are not seeing demand picking up in that sense. And there is not much, despite what Shamika is saying, but infrastructure spend in the medium term is going to create the kind of demand she's speaking of, but in the short term, which is in the coming year and the next year.
What would you have had instead? We have 1.18 lakh crores on just road infra, right? And we can bring up some of that spending that is taking place in the road infrastructure sector. Is this not enough? Do you think that these numbers needed to be higher?
I think not just numbers will be higher. The problem here is that whether we will be actually able to spend this money and how much of it is going to be in the labor component, because much of the road sector, for instance, is driven by the machinery and by material. So I don't think it is going to go into the hands of so many people. Of course, one can say it has a spin-off effect, and over a period of time, it will spill down to, in terms of wages or in terms of money in the hands of the people, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. So I think there is a problem there. And as has been was brought out earlier, I think in NREGA, the drop in allocation is 42%. In a year where 1 in every 5 informal people who are in the informal jobs have yet to find jobs, there and also to not to we need to also note that workers in the lowest income decile had the highest drop in incomes in the last year. And therefore, we are not going to see those people finding much solace from the budget, despite the fact that we have a lot of attention. Only one more point I'd like to make here, just one more point, which is that I think the government has, considering that we have such a big specter of the Chinese presence on Indian soil for quite a while. The increase in defense budget has been abysmal. If you look at with pension or without pension.
You've made a lot of different points. Points, and I want to pick some of them up. And I also then want to take attention to farm laws. We've also welcoming to this broadcast Govind Ethiraj, one of our best-known business journalists. But I want Shamika to just respond to some of the points that have been flagged, that this did not go enough in the social sector space, that the health and infra outlays, Arvind is worried that some of that money can't be spent. And a lot of people have said that this could have been the year for a COVID cess. And that if you look at, for example, how India's billionaires did quite well in this pandemic year, a billionaire COVID cess, this was the year that called out for one, Shamika, and that could have taken care of some of the issues that weren't addressed, like social sector spending and the salaried Indian who lost her job. Shamika?
Yeah. So, Barkha, I did expect an announcement on the NREG in particular, given, if you recall, that was it May and then subsequently in June, the Prime Minister did put out in one of his speeches, and I think what he calls subsequently the mini budget, that the earlier reduction, I think, was later further enhanced by a significant, now I don't recall the numbers, but today it was definitely missing in terms of something to focus on, particularly as far as rural distress is concerned. So I would have expected something more on NREGA, given that it is one of our strongest safety net. But I think this is where it's a bit early. I haven't had a look at the entire budget. I mean, I don't know if any of the panelists have, and we are broadly, just sort of reading tea leaves. So I think the devil will lie in the details when we begin to see what was the exact increase, if you look at the job cards issued in terms of the number of days worked, and subsequently, what are the projections for this year, right?
The numbers were there.
Okay, everyone want to come in. Let us just finish her point. I want then Govind Ethiraj, because he's just joined the broadcast, and then the rest of you can respond. Shamika, complete your point.
And then on the billionaire says, yes, but I think that would account for what is an imaginative. I think, these are taxes which I think, governments have to also be extremely pragmatic in wanting to push for higher taxation in the midst of a pandemic, when you truly have a reduction in growth and you're really betting on sort of green shoots and revival. And in fact, that is what we saw this year in the budget, that, on the whole, both the direct and the indirect taxes have there's an attempt to lower the regulatory burden from the taxes. So I think this was a wrong time to really expect any kind of increase in taxes.
Sure. I just want to bring in Govind now, and then I want to actually start unpacking one by one what we've seen in this budget. But just your overall take first, Govind. Hi.
Hi, thanks, Barkha, for having me. I think that we have to see this budget in the context of what happened last year, which is that we had a pandemic, we had a lockdown, and the pandemic is something that the world at large is still recovering. Western economies are continue to be devastated, both from a health perspective as well as from an economic perspective. From that point of view, I think the tenor of today's budget was welcome to me, because it's shifted almost slight, if not maybe a sharp shift in approach, in as much as we don't look like we are still on the defensive from the pandemic, which the rest of the world or major parts of the world continues to be. So that shift in tenor is critical. what the shift in tenor leads to is, I think, two or three things. One is all the announcements that you've seen in terms of investments in infrastructure, the financing of those investments in infrastructure, the creation of a bank, which is, of course, a revisitation of a much older model, the ICICIs and the IDBIs. But all of that means that we are, in some ways, getting back to work or work in progress, which is where maybe we had left off earlier. Also,
what in particular, I'm so sorry to jump in, but what in particular to you, Govind, struck you as non-defensive? You said it finally seemed that we were on the front foot, we weren't defensive. What's that one sort of announcement in the budget that struck you as shedding that defensiveness?
Actually, many announcements. I mean, if you look at all the announcements that were around investment, whether it's in roads, it's in infrastructure, in healthcare, everything somehow, to me, reflected, and the tenor. I mean, that's what it's more intangible. It's the tenor of the finance minister's presentation. I mean, she is a politician, and she would, I guess, do that at any point. But somehow, it didn't look like we were, as a country, reeling under the pandemic the way clearly we were.
It helps that our numbers are what they are, right? It also helps that our COVID numbers are
and for sure, I don't think the government can take too much credit.
Struggling Western world, that's a different debate. But it's interesting to see that you didn't feel it was defensive in tone. Now, I want to come to the one thing that is actually a thorn in the government side, which is the farm protests and what the government actually said about that agriculture credit. But Ashwini, you were wanting to make a quick point before I actually play out Nirmala Sitharaman's statement on their record on MSP and procurement. Ashwini, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of things about the discussion on employment. So one is, I agree with the fact that every item of expenditure spent on infrastructure is not automatically going to translate to greater jobs. And while COVID exacerbated the unemployment problem, we have to remember that women's participation in paid work has been declining for the last several years now. So if it was as easy as building roads and giving them jobs, this could have been done earlier.
But female labor force participation was already on the decline. It was on the decline pre-pandemic.
Yeah, but but that's what I'm saying, that the last 6 years, remember that this government also has a huge mandate. It has a huge majority, a lot of support. So a lot of things that this government can do because of the political support. So the point is that the budget is a signal of translating that political support into actionable points. And so I think that in terms of employment, it could have done more. In terms of health, it's not clear immediately just reading this number what that translates into, because a lot our glaring deficiencies in our public health were exposed also during the pandemic. These were the points I wanted to make.
Okay, and now we need to do this specifically. We've done our macro comments, so we need to pick up sort of the features of the budget one by one. Can we please play out what Nirmala Sitharaman actually said, with the government defending strongly its record on MSP and procurement levels, pointing to an improved performance, and also speaking about the mandis actually having greater access to agricultural credit. This is, of course, with one eye on the farm protest. Did the government go far enough? Did it miss an opportunity here? Let's listen to what the finance minister said.
The receipts to cotton farmers have seen a stupendous increase from 90 crores in 2013-14 to 25,974 crores I'm giving you data as of 27th January 2021. This is bound to increase. From 90 crores for cotton farmers in 2013-14 to 25,974 crores in 2021.
So, what you see, Shamika, was a defense of the government's record. You could argue that the budget was neither the space nor the time to actually make a political intervention, right? And I'd agree with that. And there is an entire budget session ahead. But there are people who say that, for example, the announcements that were made on road infra projects for pole-bound states like Assam and Bengal were also political interventions. And maybe this was that moment for the finance minister to jump in and say something that could have actually assuaged the farmer protesting on the street. Did you think this was a lost chance?
No, Barkha, because I don't think there is anything really. There is no role for the finance minister in solving the current, which is a purely political sort of problem right now. And I think it is best left to the political leaders in terms of the agriculture minister and, frankly, the prime minister's office. So I really don't think the FM had much bandwidth in terms of, doing anything, announcing anything. particular, I think.
But what did you make of the fact that the mandi system, which has been under so much scrutiny, was actually referenced as having access to greater agricultural credit? And if we can pick up that banner now, you will see that increase in the credit that is being provided for the farmer. A technical point, yes, maybe not one that's going to say anything to the protesting farmer, but the mandi system's efficacy, Shamika, still being underlined there.
No, sure. But I think the larger point here was the procurement itself and the amount of money that was eventually spent procuring, different kinds of grains, and in particular grains which come from the region where you are seeing the unrest. So I think there was underscoring of the larger point here. But I don't think any announcement from the FM would have really solved the current problem without fundamentally undermining the farm reforms. And I think that is a political debate. They're having repeated meetings, and the government has shown considerable sort of willingness to put it on hold. They've had series of discussions. So, I mean, as an economist, I have really nothing to add. And therefore, I believe it is not the mandate of a finance minister to jump into this and announce something which would really get these protesters off.
Govind, do you agree? Let me just unmute you. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, Barka, when one of the things that this economy has shown a very strong sign of is resilience. And, and we've proved that to ourselves as a country or countrymen and women time and again. I think the big challenge for any government or finance minister is to say that, okay, how do you convert that resilience or that adrenaline of resilience into growth and a growth strategy? Now, I think that's something that I didn't come to because I was only giving you the plus side. But I'm not sure. I definitely see an attempt to get back into work as usual with all those investments and infrastructure and financial market regulators and so on. But I think I'm still not seeing a big growth idea or a growth strategy to bring us back. You have to remember that we went from 8 quarters of slowdown into a lockdown. So the economy was doing bad even before COVID, as everyone knows. The second point is that, as you plan for growth, you have to think of maybe greater private sector participation, different private sector participation, including in health. Health is something that while we've been affected by the pandemic, we've put aside money for vaccines. We have to use this as an opportunity or a trigger to redesign and reimagine the very health system. Now, that may not be something that the budget has to get into, or it may not be the right place, but I would have liked to see some indication or hint that that's where we are going. And maybe in a sort of wilder thought, instead of a railway budget, which we've now, of course, subsumed into the budget, we should really look at a health budget, at least for the next couple of years, which in considerable detail lays out what the government is looking at.
But Govind, to be fair to the FM, I was struck by the fact that I don't remember a budget in my living memory as a journalist that actually opened with healthcare spending. As she opened the budget, the first thing she spoke about was healthcare and air pollution. I mean,
as would be expected, it would have been a shock if she hadn't. I mean, so I'm granting that they have done a lot, but I think the scale of the problem that was there even before COVID-19 hit us was large. And this is an opportunity to reimagine. So I'm not saying that there was something bad done here. I'm saying that what we need now is some very new ideas and a very different health budget document, which is almost like the railway budget of yesteryears, where we get down and start drilling down into minutiae on where the health money is going, how is it going, what are the new institutions, what is the role of private sector going to be, how will private and public work together to strengthen healthcare access for hundreds of millions of people.
Okay.
But it's not exactly that easy, right? I mean, it's a state subject. A lot of unspent health budget is sitting with states. So I don't think railways is a good comparison, but Barka, it would have been shocking if the focus of this budget wasn't health. So I, for one, am definitely happy. But of course, the details is where we'll have to go to see eventually. Look, I think there is a realization that the more secure people feel in terms of access to vaccination, the lower the infection rate, the more economic activity you're likely to see. And I frankly think that is the only connection with the budget.
Well, personally, I believe that the vaccination program is more important to economic activity than actually sort of recovery from COVID, which is a whole different debate, and we can have that separately because our numbers totally show that our infection fatality rate is quite low. Different debate for another day. Ashwini, to come back on the farmers, I do want to bring all of you in. I think both Shamika and Govind feel that this was, it was okay the way they handled it. What was more important was a larger growth strategy, and that's where the focus should be. But many people will believe that the farmers protesting are going to be looking at this parliament session. Of course, that discussion could still happen. What did you think about the referencing of the Mandi system, the defense of the record of the MSP and procurement?
I mean, it was fine, but it's first of all, it's partial in relation to what the farmers are asking. Secondly, the farmers' agitation, there have been developments over the last 2 months. It's reached a certain stage after these issues were raised initially. So 3 months down the line, 4 months down the line, if you're saying, we are not going to dismantle the Mandi system, there is a huge trust deficit right now, Barkha. And that can't be bridged by just a budget announcement. So I completely agree with you that not addressing the farmers' issues in the budget would have further alienated the farmers. But I think it needs more than just a couple of budget announcements. So I think it's complicated. It's reached a complicated stage right now. And the issue is not just MSP and agrarian mandis, which is what the 3 farm laws started with, but it's a larger issue related to livelihoods in the agrarian and in the non-agrarian rural economy, So, and of course, there's a trust deficit. And what's happening right now along the borders of Delhi in terms of police interventions, etc., that's not smoothing the fires, So I think that the budget would not have been announcements in the budget would not have been the place to the farmers issue for sure.
Sure. Amirullah, if you want to add to that, please. Sorry, let me unmute you. Go ahead. You're muted at your side.
Yeah. Sorry. On the farmer issue, to me, what is important is the little point that Shamika mentioned, which is, does it have a role in the finance minister's speech? She was mentioning health, but in agriculture, it's the same issue. If agriculture is a state issue, why is the FM talking about it at all? But if she is, then the fact is that the FM has talked about agriculture for the last 6 years incessantly. Remember the famous soil cards that Arun Jaitley and the Prime Minister talked about. Where are they? I mean, it was such a big thing. It was meant to just transform agriculture in India. The other promise that was made was doubling farmer incomes by 2020. I mean, where are we? We are not even at the level that the farming wages were. One of the important things that's important for everyone to realize is that rural incomes have actually fallen in the last 3 or 4 years. They haven't gone up by a lesser amount. They've actually contracted before COVID. So if we are going to make these announcements year after year, then we have to be told as to what happened to those announcements earlier. Last year was this rather bizarre announcement that farm produce will be airlifted. It was called fantastic Kisan Udan or whatever. Now, what happened to that? Do we have any one helicopter carrying wheat across the country? So the point is that on the farming issue, which is such a major issue, ignore the politics, but it's a very big issue because that has been the mainstay of growth in the country over the last 3 years. We cannot have good rains year after year. The averages are going to catch up, and we are going to see, hopefully not, but a bad rain year this year and next. And then what do? We get stuck with the numbers that the finance minister has said. Okay, yeah.
No, I just want to bring in Shamika for a quick intervention, and then Arvind Nayaram. Shamika, do go ahead.
Well, Barkha, first of all, the fact that we are talking about the current protest as if it's a larger agricultural, I think, it's a bit misleading, because it is really not a national farmers' protest. It's very much limited, and I've written a great deal on this in terms of the Punjab economy. And it's not just MSP, but the larger economy, why it is missing out on the growth that we are seeing in the neighboring states of Himachal, Haryana, etc. So I think let's not mischaracterize the current political plus. I think it's a larger social and of course an economic problem of Punjab, and making it out to be a larger agrarian problem in India. Because we have seen, if you look at productivity within the economy, you're seeing the kind of different interventions, different states, and this is where I think there's an excellent article comparing Bihar and Punjab that looks at increasing productivity and encourage, etc. So I think there is a deeper discussion, and I think we do mischaracterize by making it a general problem rather than a state-specific problem.
Well, of course, the counter to that, Shamika, could have been that the government could have left it to the states to administer these legislations and in a state-wise way, and that could actually take the fizz out of the farm protests as well and actually pass the buck back to Captain Amarinder Singh, who may not even want that. So I mean, that could be one.
Imagine in a fast liberalizing economy where we do want to encourage private enterprise, coming up with a legislation which forbids and criminalizes farmers from selling their own produce below a certain price. I mean, now as economists, I'm pretty ashamed when I have to have a discussion of this nature. And that's why I say it's less of economics and it's more of politics. And I want to stay away from that part.
Sure. Arvind, the quick last comment on the farmers, and if Govind wants to add to that, then I want to turn my attention to the tax announcements, to the LIC IPO, to some of the other things that were announced. Arvind.
Well, I think there is a bit of a...
Sorry, is that Govind coming in first, or is that Arvind? Can I go to Arvind first and then I come to you?
Can I finish quickly, because I need to move to some other place? So
Go ahead.
I think there is a big problem in the manner in which I think the debate has turned to on the farmers' issue. So if it is Punjab, why is Western UP up in flames? So, why is there are several parts of Rajasthan up in flames for that matter? So I think one needs to look at it a little more closely. I think the effort to push it only to as a Punjab issue is also actually creating a problem. Now, the other part, I think, is we need to see, you have been talking about the issues relating to, the farm laws, which was mentioned that it is, and Shamika mentioned this to a point, I think she's right. But what about the provision in the farm law which says that if a farmer has a problem with the contract they sign with somebody, they cannot approach a law, they cannot approach a court of law?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see this in any way good economics. It's really bad politics.
Okay.
But leaving it aside,
back to the budget. We need to come back to the budget. Yeah.
Barkha, I need to speak on one more thing because you haven't given me the least of time.
Sure.
So give me just
please.
Yeah. Now, which is that there is a COVID tax, and we have missed it. The COVID tax is in the form of agriculture infrastructure cess. And if you look at that cess is on what? So soya meal, on peas, on oranges, these are all agriculture products. So we have put a cess because we want to create this kind of a thing on agriculture produce itself. If you look at all the changes that have happened, included in terms of all the indirect taxes in the budget, these are regressive taxes. There is nothing on direct tax that we see, despite the fact that, and Shamika would agree with that, the study after study have shown that inequality has increased during this last year, where the 1% rich, the people on top of the heap have become very rich and the poor have been impoverished. 50% of India is now in the vulnerable category, which can fall back into poverty because of this income shock which has happened. But we have seen that the expansion in terms of, even for instance, look at the petroleum taxes, even two-wheelers, for instance, the owners of two-wheelers, owners of tractors, they all pay higher excise duty on diesel because that money is being mopped up by the government. I mean, we haven't seen any kind of relief on that. So the middle class, lower middle class and poor are going to be paying through indirect taxes, but there is no effort to mop up any kind of taxes from the very rich. I think this needs to be kept in mind.
So I do want to come back to the taxes, and I'm glad you've taken us there, but I'll allow Govind to come in both on what you've said and if he has the last word on the farm laws reference that we saw in the budget.
No, I mean, this is the larger growth idea, right? I mean, the only way you can improve the lot of farmers is to make sure that there are less farmers. And the only way you can do that is to ensure that other things happen, which is there is more urbanization, there are urban jobs, other kinds of jobs, other new industries which come up. So that is what I would have expected to some extent. And again, there are elements of that in this budget, but there have been elements of that in previous budgets as well. But a solid strategy which says that, okay, I'm going to take so many people out of farms into a different kind of workforce or a workforce environment is what will fundamentally address the problem. But then I'm not getting into the politics. I'm not sufficiently aware of, of the minutiae in it. On the tax point, and I think since we're going to talk about taxes, let me kick off the first one.
Yeah,
I think,
let's look at the tax, what we saw in the tax announcements, but go ahead, Govind.
Yeah, so I think it is obviously, I mean, if you look at how the stock markets have reacted, and I'm a financial journalist, so I start from there. The Sensex is up 2,000 points. It's partly because there is no tax. There was an expectation that there would be an increase in long-term capital gains tax. There was an expectation there would be some kind of wealth tax exactly on that increase in wealth that people have had. And there was an expectation that there would be some other tax, either on a securities transaction tax or some other tax that would creep in somewhere. And of course, potentially a higher tax rate. But remember that people on the higher end now are almost paying 43% income tax, personal income tax. That is very high. And yes, you could argue that those who are, I mean, the billionaires could surely part with some of their millions. But I don't know if it works effectively, and that's a debate, because you keep increasing the taxes and then you're disincentivizing. I mean, people run away from this country, people relocate to other geographies, and people relocate their businesses. So you somehow lose out if your best wealth creators or your smartest wealth creators from this country move to other zones. So I think that's something that to keep in mind. So from a direct tax point of view, I think this budget has been kind. And definitely has gone against expectations of some kind of hit coming. On indirect, I think
you're actually saying that's a good thing. You're actually saying that it's a good thing that we did not, because it would have been quite emotionally rational. That's an oxymoron, but emotionally rational or justifiable for the government to actually tax the billionaires, right? When you see Oxford Inequality Report saying Mukesh Ambani increased his wealth by 75%, if you just had a wealth cess for India's billionaires, that wouldn't have been resisted. You're saying it's good that the government resisted a wealth tax.
No, because it would have been tough to administer. I mean, this is mostly paper profits, right? I mean, this is the value of their stocks going up in the capital market. So you say that, okay, you were worth X thousand crores or X $1 billion in March 2020. The markets have gone up 75%. So therefore, you're now worth this much. Now, nothing has changed in my life, but I now have to pay a tax because the value of my stake in a Reliance or some other company has gone up. Now, these are very tough things to do, and I think they create more problems than solve the fundamental problem, which is tax revenue.
And do you want to respond to, well, Arvind's gone now, but he briefly made the point about a hidden COVID cess. Shamika, I'm sure you want to come in on that as well. But I'll take a quick comment from Govind and then Shamika and then Ashwini. Yes.
I mean, it is an indirect tax. I mean, indirect taxes are the bane of our existence, and we know that. And indirect tax also affect the poor more than they affect the rich. So in that sense, it does enhance inequity. But this is something that, I mean, I'm not able to respond on those specific categories. I did see a 100% alcoholic beverage cess, but I'm told, this is not confirmed, that there's an offset, as in there's another customs duty which is being taken off and this duty is being put in. So I'm assuming the money will go from the state to the center or something like that. But I don't know the details as yet.
Okay. Shamika, you want to jump in there on the tax issue, and then Ashwini and Amit?
The idea of COVID tax, Barkha, while it might be appealing, the fact is, and even when you mention that Mukesh Ambani or the Oxford inequality ranking, etc., you see, at the heart of it, we are assuming that the governments are so efficient that they can tax and really relocate and do all the wonderful things. The problem is, in my living history, I don't remember a tax ever getting abolished. Once it is brought into, it really regenerates, it sort of takes different shapes and remains and sort of adds to the regulatory burden. And it goes against the whole idea of this whole ease of doing business, etc., that we talk about. So I think a lot of it has to do with just improving compliance, just making it easy for people to pay. And that's where I think the direct tax, the reforms that they've tried to bring in this year are quite noteworthy. If you see, little things like it'll all be filled. You don't have to fill in every detail. 75 and above, people will not have to file taxes. There are little things that are being attempted in order to make taxation less cumbersome. And I think, again, the devil will lie in the details. I haven't taken a look at them yet, so I don't want to get it.
Okay, Ashwini, on sort of the tax announcements, and I think Govind makes the important point that as much as we're drawn to the idea of the billionaires paying for the rest of the country, especially since their wealth increased manifold. This is sort of giving the state the kind of interventionary power that would eventually catch up with the rest of us. And therefore, I think there's a slight discomfort with it, notwithstanding sort of Piketty's old ideas on wealth tax and so on. Ashwini.
I'm not a tax expert, so I don't know. I can't comment on the numbers, etc. But this is a very old debate in economics, whether the rich should be taxed or not. And it's a very popular view that if you tax the rich, they run away, and then they don't, they won't contribute to the growth story as much as. So let's look back then. So this tax wasn't there, right? Not that it was there this budget. So what has been the contribution of these same billionaires? If a higher tax rate was what was preventing them from contributing their full effort to the growth effort, then why did we see a lowering of the rate of growth? So for me, it seemed like a circular argument. I don't study taxes, so I don't have very firm views on whether this tax is good or that tax is better or whatever. But I'm always struck by this argument of saying, never tax the rich because then they won't invest. So why does investment go down then? So maybe there is an issue that people don't have enough purchasing power to buy the goods that these people are producing, in which case then there's a greater argument, a stronger argument to be made for injecting demand into the economy. But the same people who oppose taxing of the rich also oppose giving any cash support to the poor. So what should we be doing then?
I do want Govind to briefly respond to that.
It's not like we're not taxing the well-off. If you're earning more than 2 crores a year, you're paying 43% tax. That's not a small amount. It could be more, it could be Scandinavian levels, but it's not low.
Salary people pay a lot of tax. So I personally pay a lot of tax because I earn a salary and I earn a decent salary by Indian standards. But I'm not talking about salaried. So, when this Oxfam report that Barkha is talking about, when you just read the numbers, 4 days of wealth, Mukesh Ambani's wealth in 4 days was equal to 195,000, combined annual income of 195,000 Reliance employees. I know that these are sort of headline grabbing numbers, but my question is,
I think he made that money in an hour.
We should have, either you say that these rankings mean nothing and there's not really.
But I think the point that Govind is making, and I won't speak for him, I let him respond, is that structurally this is a bad idea. It allows for a big state sort of mentality, and then this wealth could actually just flee the country. Govind, I'll let you come in, and then Amirullah, and then we have
look, I'm not going to speak. I don't want to speak for the government. All I'm saying is that in front of the government, at a time like this, where the economy seems to have shown the resilience, but we are now looking to say how can we now build on this resilience and grow it further. You want to take your wealth creators and your job generators with you. So now, should you be not taxing them anymore at all, or should you be taxing them a little bit? That's a public policy decision. I'm not equipped to do. But yes, from where I see maybe more free market, more capitalistic, I would say that we as a country are reasonably good in terms of individual taxation. We have definitely already given the SOPs and corporate taxation, which was actually a surprise. No one expected corporate tax to be dropped suddenly the way it was, but we've dropped it. Now, yes, could they have increased it? But they've obviously chosen not to, because the call that they've taken is they would rather take everyone along, including smaller individual taxpayers, by not touching anyone. And hopefully they will contribute to growth by consuming more and spending more in the year to come.
Okay. Amirullah, sorry, you've been waiting, and then we have to take last comments. Yeah. Sorry,
Govind, this is a very interesting way of taking everybody along. So you reduce corporate tax and you do not change my taxes. That is taking me along. Wonderful. I think this is old fashioned, but in a year like this, which is unprecedented. The economic survey talked about how it comes once in 100 years. In an unprecedented year, we are talking about the regular ideological stance. We say we are talking economics. The only thing we are discussing is the politics. It's an ideological thing that we should aim for growth. In this year, we are still aiming for growth. Come on, what will it take for us to look after hunger and unemployment?
But to
Because
look
we have
after
to-
the
because,
social sector,
Barka,
but to look
I have
after
to
the
say-
to look after the poor is not the same thing as not aiming for growth. They're not mutually exclusive, right?
That is exactly what I'm saying, Barka, that in this year, looking after the poor is not looking after growth. If we are still worried about growth, then we will not look. This is unprecedented. We haven't had a contraction ever. We've never had the number of hungry go up by 60 million. We don't have people starving on the roads. We don't have millions unemployed. It is not the regular year. This year, we had to look at it differently. We keep talking cricket. It is not the same ball coming back to us again. It is swinging wildly. We had to look at it differently. You can't put a defensive foot forward. So that is why I am worried.
Okay,
Yeah.
quick response, Shamika. I could see you wanting to respond there. So let me just actually bring you in right away. Go ahead. Shamika? I don't know if we lost. Yeah, I think she's frozen. We'll get her back. Govind, do you want to take that?
My apologies.
Yeah. Sorry, Govind. Let me just unmute
It's
you.
a
Go
tricky
ahead.
subject at any point of time. I still believe that the fact that we are not taxing today in some ways is a sign that as an economy, we are feeling more confident. Now, I mean, the government can take how much ever credit it wants, but the fact is it's really the people of India, it's entrepreneurs, it's businessmen, it's businesses who've bounced back and shown resilience of a nature of a kind that we've not expected. So now, do you at this point tax them further, or do you leave them alone to continue, focusing on their energies, on their animal spirits, to use a once often used word for India? Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of inclined to that at this point. I mean, it comes. Yes, I mean, we are recovering from a pandemic, and we want to recover further, both economically and from a health point of view. And for which we need, everyone to feel, confident. We want people to feel a little happy, as the stock markets are today, and that hopefully will contribute to other things. Whereas a little bit of, like the bee, taking a little from honey from every flower. I mean, even that small thing could have caused a bit of a distortion without necessarily the benefits that you thought you would get. And I'm talking about taxes.
Sure. Now we have about 5-6 minutes left. I want to talk about some of the other things in the budget. An IPO for LIC, what they've said for the banking sector. So the IPO of LIC to be out in the next fiscal, and then a sort of set of reforms, a kind of asset management company announced for stretched banks, a kind of privatization sort of process for nationalized banks, for government banks. Govind, did anything leap out at you in particular?
Yeah, so I think here is where the cup is yet to meet the lip. I mean, there is a big gap here between intention and execution. I think they talked about Air India, that we will privatize Air India this year and Pawan Hans this year. They've been talking about this for at least 6 years or 7 years, and this government and other governments have talked about it for longer. So if we are saying that we want to raise 175,000 crore through disinvestment and privatization, and if Air India is one of the things, then the track record, frankly, doesn't give me any confidence. And I think that's where the real problem in this budget is. The announcements are very strong. They are well-intentioned, I'm assuming, and they're welcome. But to execute each of these announcements, particularly on disinvestment, is going to be a mighty challenge. LIC, yes, we want to, but tomorrow if some major unions go on strike and people start protesting and all of that, and then they start pulling back, then the whole thing is back to zero, right? And exactly what's happened in Air India. So these are very, very tough, rocks to move. And it's not going to be easy. And I think this is where in a way, there is the sort of fatal flaw in the budget. I mean, in as much as the announcements are good, but they're very, very difficult to execute.
Okay. Ashwini, do you want to come in? Do you want to come in on that?
So, one of the things that didn't get discussed, and it's related to this discussion, is the whole Atmanirbharta pillars, the 6 pillars of Atmanirbharta. And, this discussion happened during Brexit. It's happened in other countries. This inward-looking strategies at a time when globalization is a reality. And of course, there are elements of globalization that we need to guard against. But on the whole, an interaction across borders is not necessarily a bad thing. And when you combine Atmanirbharta, focus on Atmanirbharta with some of these other changes, one wonders about the kind of growth impetus. Govind, you should also be, raising these questions about where is the growth impetus coming from? Because we are saying we're going to close our borders. It's going to be Atmanirbhar, not this country, not that country, etc., etc. And that leads to a lot of concern about the rising inequality. I think it's linked. So fortunes of few industrialists, they are already risen so much. And then you're saying Atmanirbharta, you're raising protectionist barriers. So is there not a worry about the rich getting richer? And so that's something that people are, it's Atmanirbharta is taken as, something that we've always followed. And I think India has had a nice mix, although, moved across in different dimensions, but we've had a nice mix of some self-reliance coupled with benefits of international interactions, So where is this mix headed now? So I think that's a question that needs to be asked.
Govind, do you want to respond? Then I have just a couple of minutes for closing comments. Yeah.
Entirely. I agree with her entirely. I think, I am not, first of all, I've not understood Atmanirbhar because I've seen many different explanations for what it really stands for. And many of those explanations are post facto. Someone said productivity linked initiatives are Atmanirbhar, but that PLI, as far as I remember, came after the original Atmanirbhar announcement. So I think there is confusion on what it really is. But one manifestation is clearly higher tariffs, which I don't think is good. Higher tariffs for short periods might be good. Higher tariffs for political, strategic defense reasons might be, we may have no choice, like when it comes to China. But elsewhere, I think we clearly should be working and moving towards a strong, liberal, free-flowing economy, because that's the only way our own consumers will benefit. India's mobile phone growth from, and thus creating this huge digital economy with its pluses and minuses, from, let's say, 150 million smartphones to 480 million smartphones has happened because of Chinese imports. Now, you could say that, the Chinese are bad, they're evil, but the fact is that if their imports didn't come at those prices, all those smartphones wouldn't have been in the hands of millions of Indians,
sure.
and so on and so forth. So I think the important thing is to have these on timetable. When you raise tariff. But secondly, I think that's the other thing. I'm not saying I was expecting the budget to say is that, we need to keep on working on opening up our domestic economy, even for whatever strategic defense reasons. We have to raise tariffs somewhat on the international front. We have to constantly keep opening up and making goods, the flow of capital, goods, people and services easier and simpler within the country. And that, I think, separately is in itself a way to go.
Okay, I think Shamika is back with us. So if we can just come out of these graphics and take a last word from everybody. All right, Shamika, I'll start with you. Just a last thought. One of the experiments I've been doing is to ask everybody to use one word for how they would, one adjective that they would use to sum up this budget, and what would that be for you? You're on mute, Shamika. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I'd say pragmatic.
Okay. Yeah. And what seems the most pragmatic aspect for you in this budget?
The fact that we're in the midst of a pandemic, the fact that we have a very large percent of the population still not having access to the vaccine. Economic activity, while it is picking up, we are still below pre-COVID times in many, many states. And given our feeble health infrastructure, and at the same time, simultaneously, states sitting with unspent health budgets. I think budget can only go that far in terms of pushing growth and sort of development. And this is an indication of that perhaps under other circumstances, budgets can achieve a lot, but under the current health situation, I think it's pragmatic at best.
All right, interesting. Ashwini, your one word?
Wait and watch.
That's 2 words. 1 word. You've got to use 1 word.
2 words. Wait and watch.
Wait and watch. All right. Amirullah?
Disappointing.
Okay. Govind, I'll give you the last word on the last word. The 1 word you'd use for this budget?
Relief.
Relief. All right. A very interesting spectrum of emotions there. We're going to thank Govind Ethiraj at this point for joining us. We're going to thank Amirullah. We're getting a range of other experts to be with us on this special broadcast. Thank you to you, Ashwini, as well. It's been very interesting, very instructive to learn from all of you. Shamika, thank you as always. A pleasure having you on. Shamika's word, remember, was pragmatic, and we'll have all of these experts back on as the fine print of this budget becomes available as well.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.